Okay, hello everyone. Welcome. The session today is called The Impact of the Pandemic on Listening and Sound Making, and it's a panel with Paul Whitty, who is a professor of music and head of the School of Arts. Before I hand the virtual mic over to Paul, who will introduce the panel, I would like to remind you that you can use the chat to introduce yourself, either in the chat box or in the Padlet link, which will be circulated shortly. We do have a few more sessions before the festival ends, so do join us in the next couple of days as well. The program will also be linked in the chat. And we do kindly ask that you provide some feedback at the end of the session so that when we organize this event again next year, we make it even bigger and brighter and better. So we really do appreciate your feedback. Please spare a couple of minutes at the end. And yeah, with this announcement, over to you, Paul.
Okay, thanks very much, Maya. It's kind of a real privilege to be part of this Creative Industries Festival. This is the fourth week. I think we've got maybe 2 days left, and it's been a really kind of extraordinary experience, I think, for us all, hearing so many different voices discussing aspects of the creative industries as we go along. So yeah, today's session is about listening and it's about sound making. And so I've invited 5 panelists to share some of their experiences. It may be there's time for some questions at the end, and as Maya said, just put those in the chat if you'd like us to try and respond to those, and we'll get through as many of those as we can. So one of the things, just to kick things off, that I did during the pandemic, not that the pandemic is necessarily over, certainly not in some parts of the world, was thinking about how our sounding world had changed. And I have a project called Sound Diaries, which explores everyday life in sound. And one of the really difficult things about that was, on the one hand, there was a lot of celebration of the quietness during the first lockdown in March, but I was very aware that that quietness also marked distinctive and tragic and difficult events in people's lives. So one of the things I thought a lot about was thinking about the relationship between our everyday lives and events which may be happening close by or far away, and the micro changes that that can make in our sounding environment as we develop. So what I'm going to do first of all is ask the panelists to introduce themselves, which is going to involve me in some muting and unmuting. So you may have to bear with me. So if you'd just like to introduce yourselves, panelists, briefly, that would be great. So let's start up with Lawrence, if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Loz, or Lawrence, and my research is to do with field recording and sound and architecture.
Thanks, Loz. Joe? I'm struggling to unmute Joe.
Hi, I'm Jo Ross. I'm the director of Oxford Contemporary Music, and we are a producer and promoter of events, sound events and music events in Oxford. We work with sort of 4 strands really, through education work and live events, and we also work quite a lot with sound and with people who are working with Brooks, both staff and students, and there's a rich strain of what we do, which is, I suppose, what people would call sound art or sonic art, in terms of installations and outdoor events as well. So sound outdoors is a big part of what we do.
Great, thanks, Joe. Emma.
Hello, everyone. Lovely to be here. I'm a freelance musician. I live in Exeter, and I'm a violinist and composer. Consider myself an activist in those areas. I run a night in Exeter called A Quiet Night In, where we programme quiet contemporary experimental music indoors, and we're probably going to be starting to go outdoors now. I have alongside those 2 other things, I also find I have a listening practice, which I'm plundering right now.
Great, thanks very much, Emma. Matt?
Hello, my name is Matt Parker. I'm a research fellow at Oxford Brookes University in the School of Arts, and a fellow member with Paul Whitty of the Sonic Art Research Unit, alongside also with Patrick Farmer, who I see is in the audience. Hello, Patrick and Paul and everyone else. I'm researching in the field of sonic studies, sound studies, and I've also been, over the past year, co-convening with Patrick Farmer a series of visiting lecture seminars under the banner of the Sonic Art Research Unit, as well as some kind of more close group, intimate sort of seminars with several members of this panel, including Loz and Shirley, amongst other people, where we've been sort of discussing the issues that hopefully are kind of related in somewhat to the topic of today's discussion.
Great, thanks very much, Matt. And finally, Shirley.
Hi, I'm a sound artist and musician. I live over in Bristol, and I have friends in Oxford Brookes, having been there. I'm a member of BEEF here in Bristol, which is Bristol Experimental and Expanded Film. So I do collaborative work with people there. I'm currently making work from a couple of activities that happened to me. So in 2018, I went to the Arctic on an art science residency. And in 2019, I finished a project called The Unsettled Planet with Bristol University, where I was the artist in an interdisciplinary group, which is really interesting, in the seismology department. So yes, I've been happy to work and collaborate with people in Bristol over this last while in the pandemic, revisiting some of my friends in the performance area, like Extraordinary Bodies and Desperate Men, and people who work mainly in performance. So, and extraordinarily enough, I've been working a lot with dancers. So it's opened out quite a bit of a spread these last few months.
Fantastic. Thanks, Shirley. So we're just going to go around the panel now, and they're going to talk a little bit in response to my question about the sound making and listening during the pandemic. And I think we're going to start with Emma. So Emma, my question is, I'd really like you just to reflect a little on how your listening and experience of sound has changed during the pandemic, and also how that's impacted on your sound making in public or in other forums.
Yeah, okay. So I was really busy when the lockdowns started, playing as a violinist, and in fact so busy that I had sort of lost the ability to make much, and I was delighted to have to stop. Actually, it was really, as it turned out, what I needed to do, and I stepped into the void and the vacuum quite happily, to see what would happen, really. And it was amazing. It felt like a very amazing opportunity, but at the same time recognizing, and all around, and we all had this, the collective sort of shock and the experience of that quiet and the clarity of the sounds without transport and sense of stillness. And to me, I mean, there was a little bit of ambiguity, but on the whole, it seemed like a terrific gain to me. I was tending my own habitat. I was attending and tending. I felt for the first time really fully embedded in where I am, really living inside it. And I'm kind of still in that state. I had many conversations with my neighbours who all seemed to be very happy with less, happy with less. That seemed to be the message. And I started making for myself. Really didn't have any other things to make for and with, so I made for myself. And what I found is when I started making for myself, it resonated with other people. And when the traffic returned, I felt that profound grief for the loss of the clarity and the quiet, but not only about that the change in my neighbourhood, but I felt that the opportunity for change that had been presented was slipping through our fingers, and I still fear that, and we don't know what change is going to last and whether it's going to be the change that we need and desire. But I still feel as though I have that fear. It felt that my place has become to hold a space for listening now, and that's coming from a position of activism and resistance. I'm making sound walks. I'm composing sound walks, and that's totally new activity for me. And out of that, I started running group sound walks with people, which wasn't something I really thought that listening and sound walks was something that were just for me or just for somebody to do individually. But actually, I found it astonishingly connecting, to do with groups of people together, people to people connecting, and people to place connecting, all really, really important. People are hungry for it, desperate for that, I think, and I feel happy to have found something that I can offer. I've also been just making pieces in my garden, recording the sound that I found in my garden. A revelation for me is to discover, I'm sorry it's very familiar for all of you, to discover that when I make recordings, I'm making recordings using binaural microphones on my head, and I'm always in the recordings. I'm always there. I'm never inaudible. There's always some kind of sign of me there. So I realized after a while I was really trying to be really, really still all the time. And then I realized actually I'm part of it. This is truthful. I'm in it, and I'm not observing from the outside. These are actually self-portraits, it turned out. So it turns out I've been making self-portraits in sound. So I'm not particularly interested. I've become less and less interested in recording. I'm more and more interested in authentic people actually hearing with their own ears, their own space, not something that I've shaped or captured in any way for them. And a practice, I think of it as a practice of listening and hearing for ourselves, and as though our lives depend on it. Like a bird whose life does depend on sounding and then pausing to listen in equal measure, and knowing that your sounding may cause the end of you because you're drawing attention to yourself, and so you must listen as well in equal balance. People keep saying to me what I'm doing, oh, it's like mindfulness, and I really think it isn't like mindfulness. I think it's about critical, truthful listening, honest listening, and collectively facing the sound that we have, the music that we have in our habitats. So I think about this as habitat music. And I think if you can hear the music around you honestly, really hear how it is, then it enables you somehow to take a step to be able to imagine it as being different in the past and potentially different in the future. And I think it gives you a bit of a sense of agency, that it can change and we can recompose it, and that we are all composers of this music, along with people and everything in the past. So a landscape is composed by natural forces a landscape's music is composed by natural forces that created the contours in the landscape, maybe created the river, created a possibility for a habitat for people, which created the possibility for roads, which created the possibility for junctions. So the junction is composed, and the traffic light symphonies are composed. So the job of music now, fast forwarding somehow, is seems to be one for me of connecting people with each other, humans with each other, and with our habitat. Specifically relating, I started thinking about my violin and my violin playing. I haven't been playing. The violin was hanging on the wall, and I started to ask, well, how can my violin sound within a habitat, within a practice of listening to my habitat, which seems full enough already, seems full of music. How can I reconcile this lifelong practice that I have of playing the violin into this habitat listening. So that's the question that I'm trying to embrace now, of exploring how to be in a habitat and not to impose my human music onto that habitat, but recognize there's already music there, and how can I weave into it. So I'm embarking on a project, hopefully with a quiet night in, to find a way of making music in and with a habitat with other musicians, which is connecting of the people between themselves, but also responding and entwining with the sounds that we find there, and trying to develop a team to do that. I know that I only have been able to do all this because feel fortunate to have received the government's funding, the self-employment grant, and as soon as that finishes, I'm going to fall off a cliff because there's no income. So what will happen then, I don't know. I've had an amazing run of being able to make and a real purple patch of activity and create and sustained making, which has been incredible. I don't know how that's going to develop, but I'm going to keep it going as long as I possibly can. I do think that musicians are hungry now. They're not just hungry to play together and connect together, but I think they're hungry for meaningful gigs, meaningful music, meaningful connections. Not many people are turning down offers of gigs because it's not really what they want, what they need. They probably do need money, they probably do need income, but for the soul, that's not really what they need so much. So there's a bit of a kind of reckoning going on, I think, about how musicians really want to be spending their time. I'd be interested to hear if anybody else is feeling that. Finally, I probably should wrap up, but so my new position, really, I suppose, is that I am in my habitat. I'm making in my habitat where I am, digging where I am. But I don't want to become completely introverted and isolated. So the challenge is, can I do that? Can I be where I am? And can I still make work that resonates and connects with other people in other communities? And I think that can happen. But I'm really interested in this proposition of how we can travel through our creativity, not necessarily with our bodies, from place to place. And finally, I forgot to mention that my violin along the way, because I wasn't gigging, I didn't rosin my bow. And so as I do have a few residual pupils, and when they came for lessons, I found my sound became less and less reliable as the hair of the bow didn't adhere to the string, didn't glue to the string so well. So the sound would be patchy, it would go a bit whispery, unreliable and quite transparent. And actually I thought that was the perfect way, and I have yet to rosin my bow, so a year and a quarter. So it's becoming quite difficult to make a sound, and I think that's a good place. That seems to be a good place to be. I remember attending a composition seminar with Helmut Lachenmann once, and he said, to make something new, you have to break something. You have to break the old. And if it's finding a way out of the violin into the habitat, partially breaking the violin seems to be the way into it for me. I can't put the whole violin to the habitat, it'd be too much, so I have to put part of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. That's great. Yeah, more unreliable violins required, I think, for sure. Yeah, thanks very much. We're going to just move on through the group now, and then we'll come back if people have questions for Emma later on. So going to move on to Matt now. And Matt, I mean, my question is the same for you about your listening and sound experiences during the pandemic. But I also think in your particular case, it's likely you're going to talk about the way that perhaps new networks were forged through Saru and so on. So yeah, it'd be good to hear your thoughts.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Emma. I think maybe I can break this, break my kind of thoughts into two spaces. One is, one sort of, as you say, like sort of thinking particularly specifically about the seminars and the kind of relationships that we've been building as part of the Sonic Art Research Unit and in other kinds of networks that I've been joining over the internet. And and then also just think a bit more about my kind of individual practice specifically and the ways it's been affected over the last year and months, because it's been affected really badly. I think I don't feel like I feel like I was in a bit of a coma for about 6 months trying to understand what it was to be. So in my practice, a lot of the work I do is based around site-specific inquiries in the field, and suddenly I wasn't able to access any field or any of the places that I had hoped to meet and connect with people and to listen to the environments in these spaces, often contested spaces of various natures. And also that I find a lot of my work is centered around residencies, artist residencies and other kinds of like research kind of residency opportunities. Again, that has not been possible. So I've actually found it very difficult to think about how does someone who's interested in exploring specific environments in situ. I mean, one of the great things about my job for the last few years has been able to have this opportunity to go and visit places and explore them and meet the people that live in those places, or kind of encounter the environments of like different places other than where I live, and try to kind of stitch narratives that make stories about the various topics that I'm kind of inquiring into. And suddenly I can't do that and haven't been able to do that. And I've had like 3 offers for residencies that have been abroad, in Finland, in France and in Russia, which I was really excited about. And so I've been really spending a lot of time trying to think about what is the role of a field recorder so you can't access the field. And that's kind of really, I suppose, what my research is becoming less about, I suppose, where I take a microphone and the kind of environments that I might explore in my work. And as I do a lot of work, with microphones or experimental sort of sensors like contact microphones and this kind of thing, or have been in the past. And rather than just thinking about what was kind of closer to home as a kind of that will make do, it sort of didn't really make do, and I've just been trying to imagine a different type of encounter where I can bring the field into my home instead in some way, and just sort of playing with like the ideas of imagination. So I've been making lots of like playing around with like making lots of like miniaturized versions of imagined spaces where I thought I was going to go, and making more kind of, I guess, like sculptural objects than actually sort of exploring making sounds. And I suppose the sort of sounds that I make I've been making like model dioramas, and maybe there's one I can see one over here but I can't reach it because I can't reach it. Let me just go reach it. Okay, so this is a very small, like a kind of prototype model of a place that I wanted to travel to in France. I was offered to visit in France, and it's sort of a salt marsh. So this is not really sound studies in many respects, but also the process of making it, which I've been documenting, has a lot of really interesting sounds. There's a lot of like hyper objects, foam, other kinds of like grasses, and the kind of digging grass from the garden outside. Well, I say garden, I live in a block of flats and there's like a kind of dirt patch outside, to make these kind of spaces based on images that I've seen from like Google Street View and Google Images, and and then kind of making sounds with those. So this is not really, like I say, in some ways it doesn't feel like it's a sound studies project, but in other ways it does, because the spaces are relevant to particular things to do with sounds, that what I'm connecting to sound studies in some way. So that would be a ramble to go on even further about that aspect, so I shan't do that. But just to say that I've actually really struggled to kind of try and find my identity as a researcher and as a sound artist, as a practitioner in this time, and have had to adapt, which I think many people have done in their own ways. And then secondly, I've been involved with Sonic Art Research Unit, with, as I said earlier, with Patrick Farmer, co-curating and convening a series of seminars, which we've had 4 visiting practitioners over the last year that have come. And one of the great things about it is that because we've been doing it remotely via using Zoom, the common platform that we're on right now, we've been able to invite practitioners that we would never have been able to hope to be able to get to come physically to do a seminar in person at Oxford Brookes, because they live in other countries, and that's been a real pleasure. And we've also had people from the UK, but it has been a real pleasure to be able to invite people without having to worry about, are they going to, are they in the country? Are they going to be able to get to visit a location for us? And also the result of those seminars has been that we've expanded our viewership as well, probably, and possibly had more people than we might have been able to connect with if we had done them in person, which leaves us in a really difficult position of what do we do when the pandemic is over. Do we now have to run both these types of events in person online? The format seems to have been proven as something that works quite well. For example, we had Kristen Galineau, who is one of the curators at the Henry Ford Museum in Detroit, and also a practicing sound artist and writer, attends a 2-hour seminar where she just talked about her practice and had a conversation with the audience, of which there was over 50 people. It's really, it's an interesting kind of thing to think about in the future, where what is going to kind of create these, or continue to kind of keep these kind of networks and relationships going, because I feel like in the time that we've been having conversations in these large groups with invited guests, but also in the smaller events that we've been organising with people such as Loz and Shirley, who've been attending sort of intimate kind of network groups, where again people from all around the world that we had invited for these sort of small closed groups have been coming together. Some people having breakfast at the same time someone else is having dinner, and just having a talk about what they're working on and what they're thinking about, and just kind of quite general conversations about sound and art practice in general. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not kind of selling these events so much, because we haven't got a program for next year just yet. But I suppose the interesting thing that I feel at the moment is, after a whole year of this kind of making adaptations to work in an online remote capacity, there have been good things that have come out of that. And as things become to maybe more in-person activity starts to happen, how do we begin to think about adapting to that, those kind of conversations in the future? That's where I'm at.
Thanks very much, Matt. Yeah, I mean, I look forward to seeing instructional videos about the construction of dioramas from you shortly, because I think I'd like to get involved in that. But equally, I think it is fascinating that the SARO is a relatively small research group. As some of you will know, we have our festival Audiographed, and we have other events often throughout the year. But what's been really noticeable is the kind of real international footprint we've been able to create with no travel. Through these events that Matt and Patrick have been hosting. It's been sort of fascinating to see that grow and those conversations grow across borders. Thanks very much, Matt. That's great. Next up is Shirley. So Shirley, it's really a similar question for you, really, which is about your experiences of sound and listening during the pandemic, but also something about your kind of experience as a sound maker, as an event maker, as someone who performs and so on.
Okay, well, just to respond to Matt, actually, I've really enjoyed going and being in a group, that small and large, for Saru. I probably wouldn't have done that if it wasn't a pandemic. But having started, I think it has been really interesting, and I wouldn't have thought an online thing would be quite so rewarding. Okay, so I was in responding to Emma, really, and Matt, and thinking of that area of what is going on, what shall I do? I was running about a bit like Emma with hired vans and going to gigs before the pandemic, and audiographed actually. I was thinking about what happened, and in fact for me there was like an immediate reaction. So I went from gadding about and running and going to a complete opposite, and being in my kitchen, my front room, and my allotments actually, where so in my front room I was just met with myself, and like we all were in one way, and I just became more internal, and I saw Paul's sound diaries call, and I had the opportunity to send some recordings to sound diaries. So I found some equipment that was that I'd made previously with a microphone and a stethoscope, and started sending recordings of the internal body and the skin. And but the sound diaries was great because I had the opportunity to make a recording and then think about what I was going to make for the next one, and what it might be, and how it would be, and why was I doing it. So this went on for several weeks, and it allowed for quite a long process, which I particularly enjoyed. So this was coupled with me working with an artist who works with EQ, and we were making a live soundtrack for a film, a short experimental film. We were distanced, obviously, and I found myself very involved in that whole world of physicality and tactileness. So I don't really play my cello very much, but I was playing this quite a lot and working with the wood and the physicality of it. I actually had a couple of Feldenkrais sessions as well, which talks about very infinitesimally small activity in your physicality. So this was something completely different, as was the development of the sound, the body sounds, and sort of set me off on a new course. And as time went on, I was also one of those people who walked around the block in the middle of the night, because that's when you could go walking. And I had a commission to put sound on people's phones for the Wye Valley River Festival. So I reconnected with some research that I'd done for pulsars and very distant objects in the sky. And I had a great time researching more into the physics of that, which I'm not a physicist, so this was a great opportunity. And so I made a night walk where you could listen to your phone and listen to objects, stars, pulsars, and things that were coming from a really long distance away. So I found that quite extreme. So I'd been very close up and very far away. I think the pandemic, being online, a lot of things gradually went online. So some of the things I'd started previously went online. So that was interesting, because technical aspects had to come to the fore. And I think being online just edged things round. I worked with a dancer who was trapped in her attic and filmed, and worked with some sound for that. Various things came along, and eventually, of course, the birds were there. There was a choreography filmed with Wills, my son, who'd been filming and a particular blackbird sits outside of my window. So I did some 4 o'clock in the morning recordings. So I joined in with the birds. I think that I was thinking how about these changes, these arbitrary directions that are happening, and the going with the flow, or where you're bouncing off new surfaces because you can't go in one direction, you can't go out, you can't meet people, but you can go in another direction. And I found that at first I found it very frightening, but I also found it very interesting. And I understand, I was experiencing things that people were experiencing the other side of the planet, because they too couldn't go out and they too couldn't meet people. So I found that whole planetary sense quite different and interesting in my work. Alongside, there's a whole casket of fear about what the hell was happening, and some very terrible things happening. So it's in the world with people's sickness and illness and death. So I think it sort of pushed things into an intense place. So I really appreciate that can be, and that happened in that way. I think this whole talk gave me an opportunity to have a look back in the months, and I did. I think I did 22 things online and 7 things live. I counted them up. So what did actually happen over this last time? And there were some isolated times where we went into a house and isolated and did things and felt weird, and did sound recording or somebody's composition or so. So there were events happening, and there are events happening that I've been working with. Yeah, I think I'll stop there actually, because that's what I wanted to say.
That's great. Thanks very much, Shirley. I think it's really interesting. I think I've got a sense from what you're saying of the sense of the passage of time and the way that the various lockdowns have changed over that time. I mean, I don't know about anyone else, but I'm looking forward to a time when I can try and process what's actually happened rather than just be in the experience of it. At the moment, I'm somewhere in that space between still experiencing it and not understanding what's happening and coming out the other side. In my general experience, I've found it hard to understand anything, so I'm not holding my breath. But that's brilliant, Shirley. Thanks very much. We've got about 20 minutes left, so if Loz and Joe could stick to about 8 minutes, 15 seconds each, we'll have time for one question at the end. Brilliant. So I'm going to invite Loz to say something now. Obviously, Loz, I'm interested, as with everyone else, in your experiences of sound and listening during the pandemic, but also in your case, and it may be something that relates to questions that have been asked in the chat about venues and so on, live music. There's a particular project that you made or explored during the pandemic that may be of interest. Yeah.
I shall unmute myself. Yes, definitely, we shall get to that. And yeah, I just wanted to say this is a really interesting discussion, and I think we could go on for hours in many ways. This is really, really interesting. And yeah, as a musician myself, I definitely went through a lot of the existential sort of qualities of lockdown, with struggling with authenticity and anxiety and emotions of all different kinds. And in lots of good ways as well. But putting that aside and just in a way jumping directly into tackle sort of that question which has come up in the chat and is directly related to part of the angst that I came up against as well, is in terms of field recording is what I'm sort of doing. And leading before the pandemic, my field recording involved traveling around, moving, being around with people. It was very much in being lots of different places, and obviously all that stopped. And I got on with my writing, but in terms of what does a field recordist do who can't access the field, that kept me. I really didn't know how to answer that question for a long time. I started to, I recorded a little bit in the house and around, and I did what I could, but I didn't feel like I was really engaging with that very much. And again, as a musician, I really felt the devastation of my industry and everyone around me, people I know that are crew members, and obviously venues as well. And in discussions with various groups, some of the ideas that came up with involved, instead of, the other thing is that I was shielding. So I had lockdown plus. I was shielding for my wife. So it wasn't even a case of I could go and do some things as certain things changed. I literally have not been able to leave the house effectively. So yeah, it was even extra restriction. But basically, in conversations with other people, there was this sort of sense that, well, if you can't go somewhere, is it possible to get other people to get, to record, to get things for you? And then it all kind of fell together when I thought about the empty venues around the UK, and basically I got in touch with, I needed to access a big mailing list database, so I got in touch with Independent Venue Week, because I'd been watching their videos online, and they were sort of talking about what they were going through, so basically I accessed their mailing list and asked as many venues as possible, could you record silence in your venue, and just to sort of see if we could get a kind of a record of this time, these empty, desolate and silent venues. Again, I was interested in sort of sound and architecture, so I wanted to be recording venues, but I couldn't get out there. And also there's really nothing happening there. So it just seemed like a really good opportunity to do that. And so basically, we sent out this email to lots of people, and, some people really got it. In the end, I think we got about 12 recordings back, which, it would have been nice to get more, but it still makes quite a nice sort of exhibition. And I'll just put the website up. But basically, and then it was how to present it, and I thought of doing it on SoundCloud. And what was really interesting, we asked them to do a recording, take a photo, and also just announce at the beginning the venue, the time, literally the day and the time. And so all the recordings have that at the start to just set it in, to sort of place it. And it didn't work out very well on SoundCloud, so we decided to turn them into basically it's like a video, but it's just a still photo. So they're like YouTube videos, but you basically you get to see the picture of the empty venue and listen to it. I tried to get as many as I could to do a 45-minute recording, which is sort of the length of a set, let's say. But not everyone did. Some just did 10, 15 minutes. But the idea was you're listening to the sound of music not happening, and just think about just sort of meditate on that for a while, and it, in some ways they can be quite powerful in that sense, because it is, you think of the activity that goes on in a venue, the noise, the shouting, the laughter, the clanking, the banging, let alone the actual concert itself. And then here we are just listening to whatever you get to hear. It's never completely silent. But anyway, that's basically when I suddenly did find that I could actually do something. And that came fairly recently, but it was a relief to be able to connect with the situation and do something through field recording.
Fantastic, thanks, Loz. And Loz has put the link there in the chat, so do go and visit that and listen to the sound of music not happening. Thanks, Loz. Fascinating. Going to move on to Joe now, who's our final panelist. And Joe, I guess the question is, the same for you, which is about your own experiences of sound and listening, but then also particularly in your case, how it's impacted your organisation, OCM, who after all make a living by putting on live music events. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, and thanks everybody. It's been fascinating to hear your experiences, and that's something that we've it has been I suppose that set the tone really of our whole year is hearing about very varied artist experiences, from it seems to have been completely almost split down the middle between people who have found it extremely difficult and very and a very anxiety making, identity questioning time, and creatively has been very very, very tough because of that sort of lack of the lack of outside stimulation, of external contact, of all of those things that you're all describing in various ways. And then on the other hand, we've also experienced a lot of creativity from people who, again, like some of the things you were saying, who found a way to use this time either by becoming very, very productive kind of on their own, building their home studios, finding different ways to do things, exploring and developing their practice in a different way. And so I suppose a lot of what we've been doing during this year has been trying to find ways to support both of those types of artists with the activity that we've been doing. So I've had a very weird year myself. In answer to your question, Paul, about the change in my sort of relationship with listening and sound, I had a very sort of profound experience really in the early part of the year, because I got COVID in March last year and was ill, quite not in hospital, but still very severely impacted, was sort of in bed for about 3 months of that first period. And sound and music played a huge role for me in that time. Both being sort of very, very aware of all the sounds that were around. The change of the seasons was a massive thing for me in that time. It really kind of anchored me in reality and attached me to something very real going on outside. And also just in a very different way, kind of gave me an ability to kind of really connect with what was happening in other parts of the world and with other people through radio, through podcasts, through amazing apps like, I discovered about 4 months into my sort of isolation about Radio Garden, which is this extraordinary app that kind of gives you access to radio stations, independent radio stations across the globe, which I've been sort of happily exploring and finding little pockets of fascinating stuff in different parts of the world. It's been amazing. But for OCM, I mean, I think it impacted us all as a team quite a lot. We've been finding it very difficult to kind of keep that sense of kind of motivation, I suppose, because our raison d'etre is to put on live gigs. It's to bring people together in those spaces. It's to create those magic moments of connection through live music. And, and we just obviously haven't been able to do that at all. But, having said that, we've found ways to adapt, and it's actually in some ways turned into, again, like the sort of game of two halves, being a very creative time for us as well. Right at the very beginning of the time, actually before I got ill, I had a number of conversations really quickly with artists once lockdown was announced. What are we going to do? How are we going to make these things happen? And some things were postponed, of course, and that's happening across the industry. But then also some artists were, really very sort of quick to be creative about how they could make something happen. And we tried to work closely with them to kind of resource that as much as possible. So, for example, Sarah Nichols was going to be part of the Audiographed Festival that we had to cancel in that first few weeks of lockdown. and she was going to come and do her piece 12 years about climate change in Oxford. And I got straight on the phone to her and said, look, what do you think? Do you reckon you could make this an online version? And it's just so happened that she'd been talking with somebody about doing sort of studio-based recordings, and so she got in touch with them, and suddenly it turned from that into a kind of whole way in which she could deliver her tour around the UK. And so we started learning together about, the practical considerations and also the kind of tricky, the tricky sort of questions about box office income and, how people engage with this, and if they can engage in one venue, but then can they also engage in another venue, and do venues even matter when it's an online tour? Is there a kind of relationship with the place that you're performing in that way? Because she basically transferred that whole thing over. And then another project we did we were going to do a very well, it was exactly the kind of project that you absolutely could not do in that situation, which was a live gig which involved very, very close relationship between the people in the audience, kind of engineering that through sort of social structures that the person would put in place, was an artist called Martin Green, and a project called The Portal, which we were going to do at the North Wall. And in fact, he very quickly, with his producer, kind of turned that whole thing round and came up with another concept instead of postponing it, which was to do the whole story. It's eventually delivering the story, but the whole story as a podcast, a series. So he got together with various different artists and created this amazing sound world, which was broadcast last summer, and then it became the subject of a Radio 4 documentary. And we've been finding interesting things through these different ways of delivering work. And I think one of the things that's been very revealing is that what is how much more access this can give to people who wouldn't normally be able to come to these gigs, whether it be people internationally or people who find it difficult for whatever reason to get out of their homes, people who have restrictions, because of their lifestyles. And that podcast series reached about 10,000 people in the end over that period of time, which is amazing, and far beyond anything we would do live in Oxford. And the education work that we've been doing, I think similarly, it's been awful not to be able to be in the room and actually work very closely with people, in terms of especially the young people, to give them those kind of experiences and learning opportunities. But by turning those events online, we've actually found our access, our audiences have grown, and we've been able to reach, for example, with a preschool event that we've been doing, we've been reaching far more families, young families, than we did when we were delivering it in situ in the Central Library. So it's been a curious time for us. I think we feel rather like we're kind of shape-shifting as an organisation and trying to adapt to every new sort of opportunity, every new restriction in a different way. It's been exhausting in some ways, but it's also been really quite exciting in others, I think.
Great, thanks very much, Jo. I think we have about 2 minutes left, but I was just going to, that's brilliant. Really, so I just want to say thanks to all the panelists, because I think it's been a really interesting kind of and diverse array of experiences and information. There's been some really interesting talk in the chat. Earlier on, I think Matt Turner asked a question about the panel's experience and thoughts on the impact on grassroots music and musicians and venues. and in terms of future trends. And there's also a bit of discussion there from Kezia, who talks about classical music and the ways in which the experience of the pandemic might kind of change the way we consider venues and spaces and so on, and might bring about another shift in history and so on. I think also, Matt, you made an interesting response to that, which was really about the fact, and this really does fascinate me in a way, this technology has been around for a while in terms of streaming and those kinds of things, but it's almost been latent. And certainly my experience of it recently has been, there's been a great improvement in that my previous experience was someone on a propped up laptop on Skype in a meeting, or in, that kind of, with a really bad connection. Whereas I hope that what we're going to be able to do is use our kind of the knowledge that we've gained to connect more effectively with people internationally and remotely. I think I'd probably better draw it to a close, because I think, is there one very quick question from anyone they want to quickly fire into the chat, or that I've missed? Thanks, Greg. No, I think so. We'll probably leave it there. I don't know if I need to pass back to Maya for anything, housekeeping.
Fill out our form and come back for the Dandelion project and for Kate Nash, please.
Yeah, and that's later in the week. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks very much. Thanks to all the panelists. Thanks for your comments. Do go and check out the work the panelists have put into the chat. Lots of interesting things there. Yeah. Thank you very much.